All right, welcome, welcome back. I was going to jump in straightforward to what we really get in today's video, which is mocking and spies. And because previously we looked at the accessibility and test coverage, and at the end of the day, this accessibility that is a very interesting tool that allows us to actually is uh, pass check uh, is to audit known checks in accessibility. Again, this is not a bullet, this is not a silver bullet, but it can help. That actually verifies the most common accessibility problem. And this is something important, especially if you at some point in the future, some government agency come here and say, hey, you know what, we want to use your product, but your product is not accessible. So as a way to at least move toward that direction, that you at some point you have some government contract. So accessibility is a huge deal. Now we have this library that I mentioned before, the Axe Core, or with Jest, which is a nice little integration. And what it does is to actually verify that your tests, okay, especially with the validations. There is a command, or there is a function called check validations that actually verify that it passed all of these known checks, right? For example, like, hey, you need an image, put the alt. That's the wildly common accessibility issue. And also, hey, when you're in a form, you need to put a label followed by an input. Again, this known list. And for the code coverage, which is something that you should focus on testing logic that is going to be reused a lot, or critical logic, right? So for example, in the case of UI development is, well, the state management, your utility functions, or any UI components that are critical for that, right? So this is most likely the place where you want to do, or to have some code coverage, okay? To know that, hey, this piece of code is now being called, and it's being called X amount of time. So again, code coverage is something that you can also generate some reports like Istanbul, and recently now the NGC, or C8, where they have now this particular formats to show you how amount of code coverage you have, especially on, again, based on this test that you run. So we didn't deep dive too much into code coverage, despite though there are certain thresholds that you should have, or again, this is not enforced, right? But we look at how now here is this threshold as a way to now satisfy some conditions. Like, hey, at least we must to have now an X amount of percentage of our code coverage tested. Again, this is not something. This is something that is loosely. You don't find that too much in code bases. Again, for financial sectors or for any critical industry, you might want to have that not at 100%, but just something closer to. But for startups, again, this is a way of how you can is make your product more appealing when you need to sell that, right? For your exit, for the CEO exit. So, on that, all right. Then we look at how we can generate artifacts using GitHub Actions and generate code coverage report artifact. the TLDR of this is there is already a particular GitHub Actions that allows to do that. So we just create a new job for that. So this is now a use case of this artifact. You want to have these build logs for coverage logs or any other build logs or server logs, and you want to have a artifact on any release, for example. The other is for building binaries, which is if you're building React Native application, which is something that we're going to do in a next video, is something quite tedious, at least to set up. And when you want to publish those in the proper store, you might want to have this specific binaries ready for being published or ready to be published. So now, when we look right now at what we really care in today's video, which is mocking and spies, right? So I just highlight gems of wisdom from Steve Keeney that he say you should test, so your test only fails for things that you can control. In other words, any piece of logic or code that is in that level of report or that is in that level of responsibility, for example in the UI, such as Redux, you shouldn't mock that. Right? You must recreate now is a new pattern for that. But for things that you don't control, okay, it makes sense to fake stuff. It makes a lot of sense to do. So for example, API calls or payment processors. So careful, because you can't divorce yourself from reality. And I think this decision making is quite crucial as you're going to provide your UI services to companies as a consulting firm, right? And that's very interesting. Also, it's quite compelling to understand that why we do these things that we do as a way to then have a better perspective of which path should we need to take to actually is end to the destination, which is make our code maintainable. Right now with mocks and spying is like, how can we make our code maintainable that actually resemble to what the end user is going to use, so we don't actually shoot our foot when we are mocking, stuffing, all that kind of stuff. So creating your mocks and and spying is something quite interesting to take a look. So absolutely, the way how you can create your mock is by using now is the in the case of Vite you use v. In the case of Jest you use Jest. So now it gives you this object where you can now mock certain functionality. And anytime you call that, then you can apply some sort of assertion. Hey, I expect to be called one time, or I expect to be called with this amount of arguments. Mm-hmm.
The one that I do use somewhat frequently, and this will be where we kind of see a little bit more of this in practice, and I encourage you all, because like there are various things to play around with, and we will, I would follow along to this section because like we'll do an exercise where I think it's interesting to us, is time, right? Time you're allowed to mock,
Mm-hmm.
right? In my
Mocking time, oh my god. Mocking time, I think this is very interesting. Mocking time, spying on methods, creating mock. and spying on methods. So how you can spy on method? I know you are a lot of people are smart folks, so you're gonna come up with some way to actually define some sort of counter inside of a closure that every time that someone actually get in and evaluate that counter, and you now have an internal mechanism to know how many times that function was called. So, but in any case, we don't actually need to go with that. The VID or JES, what in this case, the testing framework actually provide now this functionality for us. That's great. How? You may wonder. Okay, they provide us this functionality, but how? Follow me in the code, shall we? That's interesting. Damn, it's a 10-year relation swap. Enterprise UI development. Here, let's going to take a look at the packaging list, obstacle course, accessibility, character search, counter gun, time zone, but packaging list, obstacle course. Is this one? A logjam? Oh, logjam. Do you have logjam? Okay, so you have now this function that wraps this another function, as well as your test here. Logjam. Oh, and here you say it's by on the multiply methods. So here we're gonna pass now a function here that at the end of the day, this particular function I want to is now using V to mock, right, a particular function, or you can say, hey, function, I want to mock this function. Okay, let me actually go back to show you now is the code. That was pretty straightforward. No, this is not. This one. What about this? What about this? Now, this one. Let me actually rename this. So you got this now. Enterprise UI there. Fair enough. Okay, much better. So this is our function, right? It's say, hey, this return now a mock, right? So this return is now a mock. And as you can see, well, what is a mock? Well, my mock is something that extends from the spy, and it will give you now an object, okay, that is exactly, will give you now an object that have a function that you can pass. It create now a new functions here for you, and then return this t return, which is the type of that mock that you pass here, t return, or the type return, okay. So which means is it's gonna pass extend any is equal any and return dot any. So the type of this mock that you pass through that. So in this case, as you can see here, you say, hey, counts mock, all right. and for some reason you want this to actually is console log this mock, actually see what it is. This is actually is whatever is the type of this stuff that you pass here. So if you don't pass anything, all right, there's nothing there. So to test this, we say, hey, npm run test, but it's actually running all of our tests. No, I don't want to do that. One of them failed. No, in fact, I want this to, because this repo has a very specific way to be configured, right? And it say, hey, npm test. Hey, I want to now run the CLI locally here without install anything. If that exists, run it. If it's not, hit the network, hit the npm records, and runs them. So npmx v test and the folder test like that, which is now source so vtest now source source examples login. Okay, and I want to run the test. It say, hey, login. Oh, because I need to rename this. That's right. So you have to say, hey, let's say to work.test. Okay, and now it will work as expected. So work.ts, right? It say, okay, because we didn't actually save that. And as you can see, it returns you now a object that contain is this, right? That's quite interesting. I don't know why it doesn't give me that mock interface extended from spice instance. Okay, interesting. So it gives you now this. This is why it's important to actually read the code to understand where is this coming from. So it say, hey, I'm going to extend from spice and instance, and this what you have. You know, get mock name, mock, okay, which is a mock context, mock clear, mock restore, and all of these methods here. Mock with implementation, mock return this, mock return value, and all of that kind of stuff. So if you go back a little bit to
the one other one that I will show you real quickly.
Okay, is that, hey, what if I, for example, here on a spy method,
it gives it the same.
Okay, is that, hey, now with mocks, okay, now after we create our mock, which is, hey, I want to mock this particular function that I'm passing through. So this will be now an X, which is a type of string, okay, and inside of this we want is to actually check that. So if we get something, I want to now is return, exactly, return is x dot repeat, because after all this is a string 3 times, right? And anytime I call this mock, okay, with that function or with that value, because it's going to mock now this function. Let's say, hey, ooh. All right. Or we say, hey, anytime I call this function, 1, 2, 3, and then say, woo. And I expect now this mock function to have been called to have been last called with is the argument woo, right? So if we run this, now this test already passed. So this is just as a way to, well, know what you can do here with your mock, right? So to have been last call with, that's a way to check now whether we pass is the proper argument. Good. To match inline snapshot. That's interesting. Expect mock. Okay. Or in this case, you can say, hey, if I want to now check the result of this, okay, one of them is the input and the other is from the output. Okay. If I want to check the result of this, you say, hey, to have been last call with, and to match inline snapshot, which is a function that is say, hey, I'm gonna evaluate the recent snapshot with property matches. Instead of writing a snapshot to value snap file, it will be reading into the source code automatically. So in other words, to match inline snapshot, you say, hey, I expect that function return this, right? Ooh, 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 right? So if I run this, it say, hey, it failed because interesting. Because receive expected this one. Interesting. Oh, because this is an inline snapshot, it's spied on the multiple methods, one mismatch. Okay, because this expect now like this. Now this is quite interesting. So for example, if you now send an object here, okay, and you say, hey, that's going to return now, return now, if x exists, return now an object here that has the name, John, okay, and that's now is batches. Say batch 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So for example, if you pass something, okay, to have been last call with this, well, that's gonna make more meaningful, okay? So pass X, you say, hey, I want to pass now John, and I expect now that this to match inline snapshot. It means that we expect to return now an object with this shape. So here we say, hey, this is now the shape, or the mod, or the object result, like this. But this must be expected to return as a string for that. I'm going to use template string, which is better, where you say, hey, I expect you to have now the value of John here, and followed by this. So if you now pass this, as the object got resolved, it say no, something is wrong because oh, exactly, because it expects now a valid JSON definition for that. So in our case, name John. That's right. Again, it expect is a valid value here, and now it's supposed to pass badges a name John. Okay. Oh well. Well, this is more for like a format, as you can see. Yeah, this is more for the format. But as we see, again, because this is something that now to match inline snapshot. This is good for actually matching its JSON object here. You say batches were added. It expects this. Okay. I would expect is something like this. It's similar for name John here, right? So it match that, but it say, hey, so if we say something like this, all right, you say, hey, this is how this is expected. Batches a name. Batches a name. So as you can see here, right? It's now sorted in an alphabetic order, right? That's quite interesting. So you get this batches that must be close to this. All right, followed by a name, John. Oh, without the okay. Again, I don't know why you love to add all of this. So what we can expect is this. For that, with all of this. Again, because this is something that is quite manual, okay? Because this is something that is quite manual. This is when things need to be formatted properly. So in any case, this is actually is match that inline here. I'm not gonna dive deep too much, but the whole point of this is using match to inline snapshot is to verify, for example, JSON objects, values returning from our result. So in this case, if I go back and say, instead of saying, hey, match to inline snapshot, and we say, hey, just going to verify this, okay, it will now return that as a string. So that's quite interesting here. So if we move on now to mocking third-party libraries, and
the one other one that I will show you real quick, the one that I do use somewhat frequently, and this will be where we kind of see a little bit more of this in practice. And I encourage you all, because like there are various things to play around with, and we will. I would follow along to this section because like we'll do an exercise where I think it's interesting to us. Is time, right? Time you're allowed to mock, right? In my fictitious rule set that is a blog post waiting to happen of Steve's rules of when you are not allowed to mock based on his opinions rather than facts. Time, right? And so for instance, because reasons, I'll give you the real world use case for me. I've got these drop downs for filtering, right? They send what looks like a SQL query to the back end that should get you the results. The old UI that we were migrating from had this drop down of like last 24 hours, last 3 days, whatever, right? Drop down. Originally, we were just replatforming so that we could pay down some tech debt and deploy it to our own cloud. That query engine on the back end does not support last 24 hours. That's not a thing, right? You can't send it last 24 hours, right? So, but you have to send it a query, right? So the way that we do that is pretty simple, which is start time is 24 hours ago, right? So I, take, and then on Elasticsearch that works. On SQLite, you actually have to put an end time that I had to put in the future. It's not important. And so there were all these use cases where I'm like, hey, depending on which backend you're talking to,
and if you want to actually is v1 mock, where you pass is now, hey, this is React Redux, where you shouldn't do that. And then you pass now the arguments here to this function. And then you return here is now the use dispatch and use selectors. So they use dispatch, right? Use dispatch and use selectors and use selector, right? Again. And then you have mocking third-party libraries. Mocking third-party libraries. By doing this, again, you should your test should fail on things you don't have control. Mocking API calls when the database is not ready, good. Okay. Or any other external system, okay, but logic that you own should not be mocked. to resemble of, or to have confidence that your app work as expected on the field.
And this and that and the other thing, there's a lot of logic here. So like I should write some tests, right? Mostly because for a sanity check, right? All these different things. I wanted the feedback loop. Once I got it working, I was pretty sure no one's gonna touch this code again. I don't need the test coverage for reliability. I need test coverage so I don't go insane, changing this thing and doing the mental math in my head. So in that case, I wanted to see like, hey, if I put 24 hours ago, it should have been 24 hours ago. What's the problem with time? A spy, but this will in fact work. And so now I could also look at now like inspection. I am okay with you using it to test that your code was called the way you thought. If you start mocking out
we unspy on these functions with this argument. So here you can say it's like, hey, vi spy on of this object. All right, let's go to import now a log for log, and the method you want to check, which is log. And then I want to say, hey, I want to mock this implementation. Mock implementation of that. And then I say, hey, I want you to not do anything. Okay. And I want to verify is now the function or the method here. Oh, spy on console. Spy on this particular thing, and that makes a lot of sense. And then you say, hey, I want you to now is do something here.
everything, we're gonna have words, right?
And then if you say, for example, log with, I love TypeScript for that, log with argument, which you say, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I say, hey, I expect the console.log method to be called, okay, or to have been called, to have been called with 1, 2, 3, 4 with this argument here. To have been called with this value here. And that's pretty interesting, especially when you want to now spy how many times this method has been called, or if this has been called in X amount of time. So this is useful for knowing if a method is being called, what argument have been passed. This is useful for knowing if a method is being called, what argument has been passed, or if you want to mock that function method implementation. This is the question is that, again, we mock stuff, so your test should fail for things that you control. Okay? For things that you don't own, all right. Write now a mock for that. Right now a mock for that. That makes
The
a lot
one
of
that
sense.
I had to put in the future. It's not important. And so there were all these use cases where I'm like, hey, depending on which backend you're talking to, and this and that and the other thing, there's a lot of logic here. So like, I should write some tests, right? Mostly because for a sanity check, right? All these different things. I wanted the feedback loop. Once I got it working, I was pretty sure no one's going to touch this code again. I don't need the test coverage for reliability. I need test coverage so I don't go insane, changing this thing and doing the mental math in my head. So in that case, I wanted to see like, hey, if I put 24 hours ago, it should have been 24 hours ago. What's the problem with time?
Time zones.
Well, there's lots of problems with
There's a
time.
lot
In the words, is it like Seal does it, but like it's originally, is it Kenny Loggins? Time keeps on ticking into the future, right? You can put a value in your code base. It's instantaneously a broken test, right? And in those cases, that is when you might choose to mock out time, right? So let's take a look. I have another kind of, this was just simply a little dummy file that I could write code in and see instantaneous results. We have this other one here called time zone, which is not about time zones. Does this file pass? Cool, because what I don't need to do is like have a half-done file and then be really confused when I like try to do another GitHub build action later and like it doesn't compile. So we go into this time zone. Are we running the server? We are. So this app does a few things. It shows you date.now. It shows you how long you've been staring at this page. This is hitting some public API, right? So it does like all the things that you might actually choose to mock in an application. And we have real apps that we'll use like Playwright, but I just needed something tiny. What if we needed to test this thing? This component is really hard to test. And actually, a lot of the functions in here are really hard to test. And it's got almost all of the problems that I've been leading up to in one little microcosm. I'll put extra fun ones in there, shuffles them with math.random as well, right? Same way with that UUID. Now, I would argue to kind of like start to pull a lot of our unit testing talk together, that like stuff we did with the asymmetric matchers yesterday, right? Where we like, there's parts of this I don't care about, right? Think about that. That's an option that I want to leave on the table for you. But in some cases, you're like, yo, I want to just make sure this thing mostly renders the same. Maybe you are using a snapshot for a good reason. Math.random is going to ruin your life. Time is going to ruin your life. And a third
Math.random is going to ruin your life.
party API is going to ruin your life, right? Like there are 3 problems with this ridiculous component, all of which are bad.
Okay. So there are several. Okay, because they generate new outputs. So there are several APIs that can make it hard. They can make it hard for you. They can make your tests hard to pass. Yeah, now time, math.random, in API.
Time, but in some cases, you're like, yo, I want to just make sure this thing mostly renders the same. Maybe you are using a snapshot for a good reason. Math.random is going to ruin your life. Time is going to ruin your life. And a third-party API is going to ruin your life, right? Like there are 3 problems with this ridiculous component, all of which are bad. So if we look at it, yeah, should we show the to-dos at all? It keeps the current
Uses set
time
interval
and sets it
for
on an
that.
interval. Yeah, like everything that you hate in the world is happening.
Exactly, setting out an interval here and then return to clear that interval for that, and by the time that this interval has passed, you update the time, set current time, with the dead dot now, right? And if you want it to actually show, instead of the dead dot now, is just a simple counter, which is something that we're gonna do about this on the counter. On the counter, it is. Time sum. Okay, it's on the time sum. For example, here time sum here on this index. So instead of actually showing this, we can say, hey, I want you to now show is whatever you have on the previous state. Okay, let's say 60. No, this is not here. Whatever you had on the previous state here, like 60. All right, and then I want to get that previous state, which is time, and then work with that. There's a way to say time minus minus, right? So if we now run the code here and say npm run star, okay, we go to the code. Of course, this won't render because it say, hey, I want to now is this one. All right, exactly. So now it's actually countdown to that, and not only that, we're gonna use now the current time as a way to show is that, for example, the current time, okay, and after that we're going to define the cleanup function to say, hey, when this component is unmounted, please, that interval gone. You know, avoid memory leaks here. Avoid memory leaks here. Yeah, so this is a very interesting way of how you can work with that, and then you're going to continuously evaluate that. But again, this is not what we signed for. In fact, it's this one. It's going to increment that, and it tells you is right now you're not able to see that. Okay, because we are here. Okay.
Happening.
So yeah.
It makes an API request and then it renders it to the page. So you could imagine that, like, if I did something really like egregious in this case, like for instance, this one was like giving us trouble earlier. Like should match snapshot. Well, that's not going to go well because that snapshot, well, by definition, and this is why things were breaking before. So we can do, let's do npx by test.
Okay, so we want to round out this. Insert example time, so find the test folder for that. Look at the test folder. And on the time zone test, it's going to now remove this, run the time zone, and it's say, what the French stuff is this? Oh, I get it. It's not the time zone, it's in fact is the time zone. Oh, it's because Jesus. That was interesting. Okay. Exactly. So one test failed because the snapshot didn't match that.
It fails because the time is different than the last time that it rendered. Also, apparently I changed something since then, but that doesn't really matter either way. So you could update the snapshot, and it passes until you run it again, and then it fails, right? And this is like, for my, like, this is why I went through with that query builder, and this is a place where you might choose to do something like this. So what you could do is say something like, and this is where, because y'all been asking every time, you're like, can I use it before each now? And I'm like, not yet, not yet, now, before each. I mean, you could have used it the entire time. I just choose not to because I've been hurt too many times. Sometimes you have to be like, Steve says this is the right thing. Just realize, like, Steve's been hurt. Use fake timers. And you can guess what that other method was, use real timers. You know it should probably go in the after each. Or after all. I don't really care which one you do. It's cool. And so now this one fails. Why does it fail? Because I was back to importing this time. Okay, all right, we've got the broken snapshot. It fixes. We run it again. Let's see real quick what our issue is. And it should.
Before each test?
Unless it behaves slightly differently. Let's set the time.
Set system time.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe it's out of date, or maybe there's a slight difference between jest, or maybe I'm just wrong. I was under the impression it does freeze it at the Unix epoch, but I could have been wrong. So we use fake timers, and then I set the system time to whatever time I want. And if you hate this, like, you can use new date and put in, like, you could set it to any date you want. I just took the one that was in my snapshot and went with it.
Basically, setting the system time to the fake time that you created on line 6. Okay.
Yep. And could you write this yourself? Could you monkey patch date.now, store the real date.now in another function, and then restore it after the test? You absolutely could. You shouldn't, but you absolutely could. And so this is now setting the time to one single point where it makes total sense to do that, right? And so this will freeze it in one place. There are things that you can do. For case of a snapshot test, you probably just freeze it, right? You can also, in the case of an animation, you might choose to move time forward, right? And you can do that, like, you can set it to a new system time that you can add. You can also do a, like,
Why?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but on line 7, instead of that number, couldn't you put line 6 inside of those parentheses? Or set line 6 to a variable and then put that variable in the parentheses?
What's the variable is just freezing time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Line 6 is freezing time?
Yep.
Oh.
The value actually came from the snapshot.
Yeah.
I guess I don't super understand. Is there extra complexity or a problem? You said not to do this, to do the date object, and I feel like I do it all the time.
Like for me, so for instance, I was, like, in the use case that I had, this, like, like, I'm actually displaying this number, so great, right? The use case that I had of, like, if I, like, and I chose very specific dates. I chose January 1st of that year, right? Because it was easy in my head to do what was 1 month earlier, December 1st. So if that's the kind of logic that you're using on the use case of your app, put in, like, new date, right, of, like, doing the math, right? Like, either any form of a representation of a date will work. Right, and so, like, new date. Also, it's like, can I live remember the various syntaxes you can hand to new date? Like, I'm not entirely confident that I could. We'll find out together. That was also part of it, is the fun parts of live coding. That does work.
So you run that again?
So yeah, if your logic is, like, let's say you're writing a function that is, like, 4 hours ago on a blog post, and for some reason you're not using a library for reasons I don't understand. That's not true. All those date libraries are terrible. But, like, you could theoretically choose to do something like this as well. And so this will, like, freeze it at that as that particular date or something along those lines.
So whenever you rerun the snapshot, it's still going to do that right there?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
It's set to that date. So things where you need anything where, and you can do this for any, like, effective, like, random number, right? If I do something like get to-dos, which is like I told you, we had an API that randomly shuffles like 5 blog posts, right? It breaks again. This one has a closing UL tag, so we'll update it. Yeah, it'd be great. Just update the snapshot. This is why you don't use snapshots, by the way. Oh, that one works. I got to check that one out in a second if I broke something. But like, you could also, in this point, like choose to stub out math.random, right? I wonder if faking the time breaks for reasons I don't understand. But you can choose to like stop any of these things for things you don't control, right? The other things, the one thing you want to make sure that you do in this case, though, is you want to say after each. And what do you think you do in this case?
So time back to reality.
Yeah, like you need to make sure, and I will talk about these in a second, as well. But here we go. So we have
Clear all timers.
What's it? Use real timers.
Use real timers.
Right. So that will like put everything back after every test. Now your test should run in isolation in the modern era. A lot of these API methods are from older test suites, right? These days in the modern era, most of your tests will run in a separate process, and there's less likelihood that you'll leak out. But like, it's nice to be able to switch out Jest for Vitest and not have to like worry about cleaning that stuff out. Jest will also, I believe, do that as well. But like, I'm not sure that Mocha does, for instance.
If you put after each above the tests, is this still going to do it after?
It will still do it after. This is now a question of like, what do you like more?
Reading it, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you like it?
Right. This is more likely that you're not going to mess it up. The other one feels right.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't matter.
Feels right to you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And this is why programmers are terrible people. And I have to import after each, or things won't work. And again, like right. And this is why programmers are terrible people. And I have to import after each, or things won't work. And again, like these are things that like there are certain things in this workshop, particularly when we talk about Playwright in a second, where like could some of these things deserve their own entire workshop. In fact, I think for unit testing there is one. For Cypress there is one. I did it. It's great. You should watch it. For Playwright there presently isn't one. So we're, like for some of these, we're doing the high level version of this to kind of show you the wide range of tools that you can deploy.
Interesting, especially to mock that.
So
because
I argued
if
you were back in engineering, you would have a lot more of a
time
grace from me
random
to mock stuff out.
Random.
Right, like systems, like writing to the database, maybe don't choose to do it. Credit cards, awesome, right? Like all sorts of stuff that you shouldn't do. Front-end engineers, it's like time, random UUIDs, random sorting, and then the last one, which I keep skirting around, is API requests. So the meta point that I was trying to build to, right, is on the periphery, the best practice for a really long time, and if you still do it, you have no judgment from me, is mocking out fetch, XAHR callback. Wow, I don't remember. HTTP. I don't even remember what the old event was that fetch is based on to make HX requests before fetch. That's a sign that times are changing. XML HTTP request. There it is. Objects, whatever. Like you could do all of those things. The thing is,
but now there is
mobile phones exist, and one of the things that exist on mobile phones these days are progressive web apps with offline mode, and those are powered by service workers. Service workers exist behind the scenes, and they run outside the browser context. Their main job is they intercept network requests so that you can have like stuff like offline mode and stuff like that. And then instead of like going and hitting the network.
So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye.